Paris is the capital and most populous city of France. Situated on the Seine River, in the north of the country, it is in the center of the Île-de-France region, also known as the Région Parisienne. Paris region. The city of Paris has an area of 105 square kilometers and a population of 2,241,346 within its administrative borders, essentially unchanged since 1860. Since the 19th century, the built-up area of Paris has grown far beyond its administrative borders, together with its suburbs. The whole agglomeration has a population of 10,550,350. Paris's metropolitan area spans most of the Paris region and has a population of 12,341,418, or one-fifth of the population of France. The administrative region covers 12,012 square kilometers, with approximately 12 million inhabitants as of 2014, and has its own regional council and president. Paris was founded in the 3rd century BC by a Celtic people called the Parisii, who gave the city its name. By the 12th century, Paris was the largest city in the Western world, a prosperous trading center, and the home of the University of Paris, one of the first in Europe. In the 18th century, it was the center stage for the French Revolution, and became an important center of finance, commerce, fashion, science, and the arts, a position it still retains today. The Paris region had a GDP of €624 billion in 2012, accounting for 30.0% of the GDP of France. And ranking it as one of the wealthiest 5 regions in Europe. It is the banking and financial center of France, and contains the headquarters of 29 of the 31 companies in France ranked in the 2015 Fortune Global 500. Paris is the home of the most visited art museum in the world, the Louvre, as well as the Musée d'Orsay, noted for its collection of French Impressionist art, and the Musée National d'Art Moderne, a museum of modern and contemporary art. The notable architectural landmarks of Paris include Notre Dame Cathedral, the Sainte-Chapelle, the Eiffel Tower, and the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur, on Montmartre. In 2014, Paris received 22.4 million visitors, making it one of the world's top tourist destinations. Paris is also known for its fashion, particularly the twice-yearly Paris Fashion Week, and for its haute cuisine, and 3-star restaurants. Most of France's major universities and grandes écoles are located in Paris, as of France's major newspapers, including Le Monde, Le Figaro, and Libération. Paris is home to the Association Football Club Paris Saint-Germain and the rugby union club Stade Français. The 80,000-seat Stade de France, built for the 1998 FIFA World Cup, is located just north of Paris in the commune of Saint-Denis. Paris hosts the annual French Open Grand Slam tennis tournament on the red clay of Roland Garros. Paris played host to the 1919-24 Summer Olympics, the 1938 and 1998 FIFA World Cups, and the 2007 Rugby World Cup. The city is a major rail, highway, and air transport hub, served by the 2 international airports Paris-Charles de Gaulle and Paris-Orly. Opened in 1900, the city's subway system, the Paris Metro, serves 4.5 million passengers daily. Paris is the hub of the national road network, and is surrounded by 3 orbital roads: the Périphérique, the A86 motorway, and the Francilienne motorway in the outer suburbs. History. Etymology. The name of Paris is derived from its early inhabitants, the Celtic Parisii tribe. Paris is often referred to as the City of Light, both because of its leading role during the Age of Enlightenment, and more literally because Paris was one of the first European cities to adopt gas street lighting. In the 1860s, the boulevards and streets of Paris were illuminated by 56,000 gas lamps. Since the late 19th century, Paris is also known as Panem in French slang. Inhabitants are known in English as Parisians, and in French as Parisians, pejoratively also called Paragots. Origins. The Parisii, a sub-tribe of the Celtic Senones, inhabited the Paris area from around the middle of the 3rd century BC. One of the area's major north-south trade routes crossed the Seine on the Ile de la Cité. This meeting place of land and water trade routes gradually became a town and an important trading center. The Parisii traded with many river towns as far away as the Iberian Peninsula, and minted their own coins for that purpose. The Romans conquered the Paris basin in 52 BC and, after making the island a garrison camp, began extending their settlement in a more permanent way to Paris's left bank. The Gallo-Roman town was originally called Lutetia. It became a prosperous city with a forum, baths, temples, theatres, and an amphitheatre. By the end of the Western Roman Empire, the town was known simply as Parisius in Latin and Paris in French. Christianity was introduced in the middle of the 3rd century AD. According to tradition, it was brought by Saint Denis, the first bishop of Paris. When he refused to renounce his faith, he was beheaded on the hill which became known as the Mountain of Martyrs, eventually Montmartre. His burial place became an important religious shrine. The Basilica of Saint Denis was built there and became the burial place of the French kings. Clovis the Frank, the first king of the Merovingian dynasty, made the city his capital from 508. A gradual immigration by the Franks also occurred in Paris in the beginning of the Frankish domination of Gaul, which created the Parisian Francian dialects. Fortification of the Ile-de-France failed to prevent sacking by Vikings in 845, but Paris's strategic importance, with its bridges preventing ships from passing, was established by successful defense in the Siege of Paris. In 987, Hugh Capet, Count of Paris, Duke of the Franks, was elected King of the Franks. Under the rule of the Capetian kings, Paris gradually became the largest and most prosperous city in France. Middle Ages to Louis XIV. By the end of the 12th century, Paris had become the political, economic, religious, and cultural capital of France. The Ile de la Cité was the site of the royal palace. In 1163, during the reign of Louis VII, Maurice de Sully, Bishop of Paris, undertook the construction of the Notre Dame Cathedral at its eastern extremity. The left bank was the site of the University of Paris, a corporation of students and teachers formed in the mid-12th century to train scholars first in theology, and later in canon law, medicine and the arts. The right bank became the center of commerce and finance. The merchants who controlled the trade on the river formed a league and quickly became a powerful force. Between 1190 and 1202, Philip Augustus built the massive fortress of the Louvre, continued the construction of Notre Dame, rebuilt the two bridges, began paving Paris's main thoroughfares, and the construction of a fortified wall around the city. During the 100 Years' War, the army of the Duke of Burgundy and a force of about 200 English soldiers occupied Paris from May 1420 until 1436. They repelled an attempt by Joan of Arc to liberate the city in 1429. A century later, during the French Wars of Religion, Paris was a stronghold of the Catholic League. On the 24th of August 1572, Paris was the site of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when thousands of French Protestants were killed. The last of these wars, the eighth one, ended in 1594, after Henry IV had converted to Catholicism and was finally able to enter Paris as he supposedly declared Paris vort bien une messe. The city had been neglected for decades. By the time of his assassination in 1610, Henry IV had rebuilt the Pont Neuf, the first Paris bridge with sidewalks and not lined with buildings, linked with a new wing, the Louvre, to the Tuileries Palace, and created the first Paris residential square, the Place Royal, now Place des Vosges. In the 17th century, Cardinal Richelieu, chief minister of Louis XIII, was determined to make Paris the most beautiful city in Europe. He built 5 new bridges, a new chapel for the College of Sorbonne, and a palace for himself, the Palais Cardinal, which he bequeathed to Louis XIII, and which became, after his own death in 1642, the Palais Royal. Louis XIV distrusted the Parisians and moved his court to Versailles in 1682. But his reign also saw an unprecedented flourishing of the arts and sciences in Paris. The Comédie Française, the Academy of Painting, and the French Academy of Sciences were founded and made their headquarters in the city. To show that the city was safe against attack, he had the city walls demolished, replacing them with grand boulevards. To leave monuments to his reign, he built the Collège des Quatre Nations, Place Vendôme, Place des Victoires, and began Les Invalides. The 18th and 19th century. Between 1640 and 1789, Paris grew in population from 400,000 to 600,000. A new boulevard, the Champs-Élysées, extended the city west to Étoile, while the working-class neighborhood of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine on the eastern side of the city grew more and more crowded with poor migrants from other regions of France. Paris was the center of an explosion of philosophic and scientific activity known as the Age of Enlightenment. Diderot and D'Alembert published the Encyclopédie in 1751–52, and the Montgolfier brothers launched the first manned flight in a hot air balloon on 21 November 1783, from the gardens of the Château de la Muette. Paris was the financial capital of continental Europe, the primary European center of book publishing, fashion, and the manufacture of fine furniture and luxury goods. In the summer of 1789, Paris became the center stage of the French Revolution. On 14 July, a mob seized the arsenal at the Invalides, acquiring thousands of guns, and stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal authority. Louis XVI and the royal family were brought to Paris and made virtual prisoners within the Tuileries Palace. In 1793, as the revolution turned more and more radical, the king, queen, and the mayor were guillotined, along with more than 16,000 others. During the Reign of Terror, the property of the aristocracy and the church was nationalized, and the city's churches were closed, sold or demolished. A succession of revolutionary factions ruled Paris until 9 November 1799, when Napoleon Bonaparte seized power as first consul. The population of Paris had dropped by 100,000 during the Revolution, but between 1799 and 1815, it surged with 160,000 new residents, reaching 660,000. Bonaparte replaced the elected government of Paris with a prefect reporting only to him. He began erecting monuments to military glory, including the Arc de Triomphe, and improved the neglected infrastructure of the city with new fountains, the Canal de l'Ourcq, Père Lachaise Cemetery, and the city's first metal bridge, the Pont des Arts. During the Restoration, the bridges and squares of Paris were returned to their pre-revolution names, but the July Revolution of 1830 in Paris brought a constitutional monarch, Louis Philippe, to power. The first railway line to Paris opened in 1837, beginning a new period of massive migration from the provinces to the city. Louis Philippe was overthrown by a popular uprising in the streets of Paris in 1848. His successor, Napoleon III, and the newly appointed prefect of the Seine, Georges-Eugène Haussmann, launched the gigantic public works project to build wide new boulevards, a new opera house, a central market, new aqueducts, sewers, and parks, including the Bois de Boulogne and Bois de Vincennes. In 1860, Napoleon III also annexed the surrounding towns and created 8 new arrondissements, expanding Paris to its current limits. During the Franco-Prussian War, Paris was besieged by the Prussian army. After months of blockade, hunger, and then bombardment by the Prussians, the city was forced to surrender on 28 January 1871. On 28 March, a revolutionary government called the Paris Commune seized power in Paris. The Commune held power for 2 months, until it was harshly suppressed by the French army during the Bloody Week at the end of May 1871. Late in the 19th century, Paris hosted 2 major international expositions. The 1889 Universal Exposition was held to mark the centennial of the French Revolution and featured the new Eiffel Tower, and the 1900 Universal Exposition, which gave Paris the Pont Alexandre III, the Grand Palais, the Petit Palais and the first Paris Metro line. Paris became the laboratory of naturalism and symbolism, and of impressionism in our 20th and 21st century by 1901. The population of Paris had grown to 2,715,000. At the beginning of the century, artists from around the world, including Picasso, Modigliani and Matisse, made Paris their home. It was the birthplace of Fauvism, Cubism and abstract art, and authors such as Marcel Proust were exploring new approaches to literature. During the First World War, Paris sometimes found itself on the front line. 600 to 1,000 Paris taxis played a small but highly important symbolic role in transporting 6,000 soldiers to the front line at the First Battle of the Marne. The city was also bombed by Zeppelins and shelled by German long-range guns. In the years after the war, known as les années écoutes follies, Paris continued to be a mecca for writers, musicians and artists from around the world, including Ernest Hemingway, Igor Stravinsky, James Joyce, Josephine Baker, Sidney Bechet and the surrealist Salvador Dali. In the years after the peace conference, the city was also home to growing numbers of students and activists from French colonies and other Asian and African countries, who later became leaders of their countries, such as Ho Chi Minh, Zhou Enlai and Leopold Sedar Senghor. On 14 June 1940, the German army marched into Paris, which had been declared an open city. On 16-17 July 1942, following German orders, the French police and gendarmes arrested 12,884 Jews, including 4,115 children, and confined them during 5 days at the Vel d'Hiv, from which they were transported by train to the extermination camp at Auschwitz. None of the children came back. On 25 August 1944, the city was liberated by the French 2nd Armored Division and the 4th Infantry Division of the United States Army. General Charles de Gaulle led a huge and emotional crowd down the Champs-Élysées towards Notre Dame de Paris, and made a rousing speech from the Hôtel de Ville. In the 1950s and the 1960s, Paris became one front of the Algerian War for Independence. In August 1961, the pro-independence FLN targeted and killed 11 Paris policemen, leading to the imposition of a curfew on Muslims of Algeria. On 17 October 1961, an unauthorized but peaceful protest demonstration of Algerians against the curfew led to violent confrontations between the police and demonstrators, in which at least 40 people were killed, including some thrown into the Seine. The anti-independence organization de l'Armée écoute secrète, for their part, carried out a series of bombings in Paris throughout 1961 and 1962. In May 1968, protesting students occupied the Sorbonne and put up barricades in the Latin Quarter. Thousands of Parisian blue-collar workers joined the students, and the movement grew into a 2-week general strike. Supporters of the government won the June elections by a large majority. The May 1968 events in France resulted in the breakup of the University of Paris into 13 independent campuses. In 1975, the National Assembly changed the status of Paris to that of other French cities. On 25 March 1977, Jacques Chirac became the first elected mayor of Paris since 1793. The Tour Montparnasse, the tallest building in the city at 57 stories and 210 meters high, was built between 1969 and 1973. It was highly controversial, and it remains the only building in the center of the city over 32 stories high. The population of Paris dropped from 2,850,000 in 1954 to 2,152,000 in 1990, as middle-class families moved to the suburbs. A suburban railway network, the RER, was built to complement the metro, and the Peripheric Expressway encircling the city was completed in 1973. Most of the post-wars presidents of the Fifth Republic wanted to leave their own monuments in Paris. President Georges Pompidou started the center. Georges Pompidou, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing began the Musée d'Orsay. President François Mitterrand, in power for 14 years, built the Opéra Bastille, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Arche de la Défense, and the Louvre Pyramid with its underground courtyard. Jacques Chirac, the Musée du Quai Branly. In the early 21st century, the population of Paris began to increase slowly again, as more young people moved into the city. It reached 2.25 million in 2011. In March 2001, Bertrand Delanoë became the first socialist mayor of Paris. In 2007, in an effort to reduce car traffic in the city, he introduced the Véhicule Libre, a system which rents bicycles for the use of local residents and visitors. Bertrand Delanoë also transformed a section of the highway along the left bank of the Seine into an urban promenade and park, the Promenade des Berges de la Seine, which he inaugurated in June 2013. In 2007, President Nicolas Sarkozy launched the Grand Paris Project, to integrate Paris more closely with the towns in the region around it. After many modifications, the new area, named the Metropolis of Grand Paris, with a population of 6.7 million, is scheduled for creation on 1 January 2016. In 2011, the City of Paris and the national government approved the plans for the Grand Paris Express, totaling 205 kilometers of automated metro lines to connect Paris, the innermost three departments around Paris, airports and high-speed rail stations, at an estimated cost of €35 billion. The system is scheduled to be completed by 2030. On 5 April 2014, Anne Hidalgo, a socialist, was elected the first female mayor of Paris. On 7 January 2015, two French Muslim extremists attacked the Paris headquarters of Charlie Hebdo and killed 13 people, and on 9 January, a third terrorist killed 4 hostages during an attack at a Jewish grocery store at Porte de Vincennes. On the 11th of January, an estimated 1.5 million people marched in Paris along with international political leaders to show solidarity against terrorism and in defense of freedom of speech. 10 months later, the 13th of November 2015, came a series of coordinated terrorist attacks in Paris and Saint-Denis claimed by the Islamic State organization ISIL. 130 people were killed by gunfire and bombs, and more than 350 were injured. 7 of the attackers killed themselves and others by setting off their explosive vests. On the morning of the 18th of November, 3 suspected terrorists, including alleged planner of the attacks Abdelhamid Abaoud, were killed in a shootout with police in the Paris suburb of Saint-Denis. President Hollande declared France to be in a 3-month state of emergency.